So I'm going to talk about mobility for the new Army Combat Fitness Test. With the new test, the 6 events are asking us to do things a little differently than the old Army Physical Fitness Test. And with those new events, we're going to be going through greater ranges of motion for several of our joints. So instead of just having the push-up, sit-up, and 2-mile run, we're going to be doing things like the deadlift, the standing power throw, the leg tuck, things that we have to have a better or greater range of motion through certain joints. So the very first event, the deadlift, you need to have appropriate ankle dorsiflexion where your knee can travel forward over your foot. You need to have appropriate hip mobility to do that event. With the arm extension push-up, you're going through a larger or greater range of motion. You're coming down all the way to your chest, so you have to have good wrist extension and shoulder extension. With the standing power throw, you need to be able to get your arms up overhead, so shoulder flexion, and with that spinal extension, and then even some hip extension, so you can throw the ball back up over your head. And then the leg tuck, you need some spinal flexion, and you still need to be able to get your arm up overhead. So all those events, pretty big differences from what we're used to, and so mobility is important. The most obvious reason it's important is we want to prevent injury. We don't want to get hurt. We don't want to get seriously hurt where we can't do anything, but we also don't want to just have nagging pain that kind of limits us. And then lastly, we want to have the best performance that we can. So even if you don't get hurt or you don't have pain, decreased mobility can hinder your performance. Just a good example of that is a standing power throw. So if you can only get your arms up this high, it changes the release point of the ball when you're doing that event, which can drastically hinder your performance. And so all of the events, there's going to be aspects like that where your performance can vary based on your mobility. When we're talking about mobility of a joint, there's 3 main components that contribute to it. So joints generally that are more mobile are a little bit less stable, and more stable joints are generally a little bit less stable. So we get our stability in our joints from the bony anatomy, just how the bones fit together. So like in the hip, it's a pretty stable joint. It's got a real deep socket that a ball fits into, versus the shoulder, which is less stable, has a real shallow socket and a ball. And so the bony anatomy is different. Then you've got your capsule and your ligaments around the joint that provide stability and restrict mobility, potentially. And then lastly, you have your muscles that cross the joint and control the joint and can restrict mobility if they're tight. So those are the 3 components. During the next several videos, we're going to show you different ways, primarily to target the soft tissue, so the muscles and then the joint capsule, how to do some basic mobility drills and things to help improve your mobility. The last thing that can affect your mobility is just your motor control, your coordination, so how your nervous system controls your muscles. That is something that gets better with practice. So you have to practice the events, you have to practice the movements in a good, correct way in order to improve that. The way that it can restrict your mobility is if you are not used to going to a movement, or you're fearful that you might have pain. Your body's pretty good at kind of shutting down a movement and restricting it, just out of basically to protect you. Okay, so stay tuned for the next couple of videos, and we'll show you how to do different drills to help improve that function.